Hello everyone, this is part 15 of What If Naruto Was a Puppeteer, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Shijinda never really felt he belonged in Kumogakur. As the sixth son in a large family, it was practically expected of him to become a shinobi. His brothers were allowed to take up normal jobs, running the family shop, going off to learn trades. One even became a semi-successful writer. His father wouldn't allow two layabouts in the family though, and with no need for a third hand around the shop, Kumo's academy was his only choice. Well, not quite. It was become a ninja, or be kicked out in disgrace. He didn't like it. He didn't like the fighting. He didn't like the constant training. He hated the violence. He had hoped to graduate, pass on to Chunin and fade into the background, living a quiet life off the most boring and lackluster missions he could find. He didn't think he would even mind becoming one of those career genin that were the butt of every able shinobi's joke. A few years ago, it might have even been possible. The war changed all that. Suddenly he was stuck out in the freezing cold of Frost Country, patrolling and guarding with a constant sword of Damocles hanging over his head. He had seen combat only once, a botched ambush in a desolate mountain pass, snow drifts up to his waist, and it had been enough to turn him off completely. But it wasn't like you could retire from being a shinobi. Not in Kumo. Their culture was practically built on their military power and strength. Leaving the corp would have been worse than becoming Ronin. There was a reason Kumo turned out so few new nin. His only balm in this life of forced misery was Amai, the beautiful blacksmith's apprentice who recently set up her own shop. It was unusual that, a female blacksmith. Kumo hardly had that kind of prejudice, but that wasn't to say that certain professions weren't discouraged for young ladies. Scars earned in battle were viewed with pride. Scars earning at the forge were just seen as wasteful. Kei didn't see it that way. He saw the little streaks of white against Amai's dark skin as proof of her dedication to a craft she had been dissuaded against her whole life. He just wished he had that kind of spirit. Then he might have been able to stand up to his father. He made every excuse he could to go see her, spending far more on kunai than he would ever use and browsing her shelves of finely crafted weapons for minutes at a time. When she had first come up behind him, commenting on a gleaming Naginator displayed on the wall, he had only babbled incoherently. She had laughed, a beautiful, smoky sound. She had found him funny. He kept going back, hoping to hear that laugh again. She didn't seem to mind the company, talking with him idly. She mostly talked about weapons, and her craft, but he didn't care. He just enjoyed hearing her speak. Eventually, he began to open up a bit, telling her how uncomfortable he was with his life, with the pressure of Kumo's society weighing him down. As the war progressed, he told her more. His fears that the next mission would be his last. That a Konoha kunai would find its mark in his neck. Eventually, she talked back. She told him of a benefactor that had helped her gather the funds for her own shop. The man she had been apprenticed to had only allowed her to thanks to her prodigious skill, but only gave her the most meager cut of the commissions she filled. He hoped to keep her under her heel for as long as possible, hoping her skill would make him rich. An anonymous party had come to her, offering her money. Offering her independence. The price. A single favor. It was treasonous. His mind kept telling him so. Every ingrained instinct from the academy told him to report this, to tell a Junin that somebody was trying to tempt him away from the village. But every time he moved to do so, the earnest look in her eyes stopped him. She didn't think it was treasonous to be happy. She just wanted to help him, and repay a kindness from a stranger. Still, he was torn. Logically, he understood where she was coming from. She knew he was unhappy here and was offering him a different life, in Konoha. Her benefactor had the connections there to make it happen. All he had to do was smuggle somebody out of the village and deliver them to Konoha's hands. A prisoner of war apparently. He had, of course, heard the propaganda that Kumo had started the war by kidnapping a high-profile target from the Leaf Nin, but hadn't bought into it. Now though, as he sat on his bed, hands fumbling around the detailed instructions he would have to follow, he was uncertain. Could he give up everything he had known, just for the promise of a potentially better life in another village? Amai appeared in his mind's eye again, smiling softly, crinkling the faded white scar that highlighted her jaw. Naruto breathed a sigh of relief as he read over the neat script of his chief agent in Kumo. It had been beyond difficult to successfully infiltrate the militaristic village to any useful degree. It might have been impossible if not for the war launching all sorts of people up the ranks faster than their bureaucracy could handle. As it was, even extending these kinds of feelers was a slow, time-consuming and high-risk affair. But Kay had accepted. He would have to see about moving Amai out too. It would be bad if this security breach was traced back to her. Plus, Konoha could always use more talented smiths, and she was far more likely to be appreciated here. He'd see about introducing her to Tenten once he could arrange for it. He figured the blacksmith and the weapon-obsessed girl would be a good fit, and it would serve as another point of familiarity for K2. He made sure to take good care of his assets, not just when they were useful to him. The knot in his stomach relaxed a little, but not by much. This was still, by far, the most ill-advised, reckless plan he had ever undertaken. So many loose variables. Too many things that could easily go wrong. Hell, he had to sneak Hanabi into Kumo before Kay could sneak her out. When he was put under the rigorous scrutiny all defectors were placed under, he couldn't leave so much as a single detail that could point the Yamanaka to this being staged. Running covert operations against your own village would be so much easier if they didn't have bloody mind readers. Something could go wrong with the extraction. Kay might falter and betray him. Someone might slip in their story. Hanabi might slip in her story. And then, always niggling in the back of his mind, was the small, snide voice telling him he was being foolish. That this was all a ploy and Hanabi wouldn't hesitate to reveal all of his secrets and bring all of it crashing down on his head. He leaned back in his seat and took a long breath, counting backwards from 9. He had to have faith in his own planning. There were contingencies upon contingencies for all of this. Things would work. He had spent weeks going over Hanabi's story with her, ingraining it in her head until it might as well have been fact. She was a good student. She was his student. It would be fine. The knot in his stomach refused to loosen. The Hokage turned his pipe over in his hands, not so much a nervous tick as it was a calculated move designed to draw attention to himself. It almost dared anyone else in the room to break the silence. It wasn't even that tense, not by a long shot. In fact, compared to some meetings Naruto had endured in this very same office, it was downright cordial. Of course, with Hyashi's perfect posture to his right, it certainly felt more officious than it was. I believe I have an understanding of the situation now, the Sandai mused, thankfully no accusation in his tone. This is a good day for the village, but I would still like to ensure I'm not missing anything. As I currently understand it, Naruto, let's call them a friend, in Kumogakure, contacted you about young Hanabi's imprisonment within their village. You, in turn, managed to organize her escape on the grounds that the ninja used to smuggle her out would be accepted in Konoha. He glanced down at the slim file on his desk, a picture of Kay poking out of the cover. Which, I would be more than happy to allow, if all of this is correct. Naruto allowed his head to dip slightly, knowing this was a tough concession on his part. There's no need to dance around the topic, Hokage-sama. I have agents in the other hidden villages, I'm not hiding that from you. Letting others know was less acceptable, but if it sold the story he could let it slide. And it would be hypocritical of me to begrudge you having an information network. The older man sent a sidelong glance at Jiraiya, one of the few ninja permitted to the meeting, standing off in a corner. I know personally how useful they can be. My only concern is that you didn't inform anybody of your plans. This is an extremely delicate matter that, if handled improperly, could have had dire consequences on the international stage. Did I do anything improperly? Naruto countered, keeping his tone light and trying to avoid sounding provocative. He wanted the mood of the discussion to stay on what he had done, so it didn't stray too far into the how, or more concerningly, the why. Hiruzen gave a warm smile, again glancing down at the file. It was an act of course. Naruto had no doubts that the contents had already been committed to memory. From what I can see, no. And I don't mean to cast any aspersions on you, my boy, I just have to be sure. If you want, I can provide you with a full breakdown of my network, to do with as you see fit, he offered, as if on the spur of the moment. This was a risky gamble, and it relied on him predicting how the Hokage would react to the seemingly sincere gesture. In reality, he would rather the Sandaime not learn the full scope of his organization. He tried for a sheepish, disarming smile. To be honest, it sort of happened out of nowhere. I started making connections while out on missions, they would occasionally send me some tips, I'd try to help them in return, and it just sort of grew from there. He already had a highly doctored version of the network he was willing to hand over, but even that would be less than ideal. I don't think there's any need for that, the Hokage assuaged with a causal wave of his hand, clearly placated. Naruto had always suspected the old man might have a bit of a blind spot where he was concerned. I've never had any doubts you have nothing but the best interests of the village in mind. Rescuing one of our own simply seals the matter. Don't you agree, Hiashi? The regal-looking clan head inclined his head just the right amount to imply submission without undermining his own authority. I have held my peace until now out of deference. But, to be candid Hokage Dono, I believe I speak for the entirety of the Hyuga clan when I say that the means of my youngest daughter's extrication is irrelevant. The clan offers its most profound thanks to Uzumaki-san. If Naruto hadn't already known how good an orator Hiashi was, he might have thought the little speech rehearsed. The man inclined his head again, this time a hair lower. If I may be excused then. Of course, the Hokage said with somewhat of a wistful smile. I'm sorry for keeping you from your daughter for so long. The clan head nodded and made a hasty retreat, still looking dignified despite his rush. The Hokage watched him leave before turning a conspiratorial smile on Naruto. I suspect he'll have more to say to you in private. Hiashi is a proud man, but never one who forgets those who have helped him. Naruto rubbed the back of his head again, shrugging awkwardly. Well, I'd be lying if I said I did it for any kind of reward. You asked why I kept it from you. To be perfectly candid, it was sort of a spur-of-the-moment thing. I got a tip about where she was being kept, and the news came in about Kay, and it just seemed to fit. I didn't want to get any hopes up because I wasn't sure it would work myself. He allowed some of his genuine relief at the plan coming together to bleed through. I'm glad it did though. As am I, the Hokage agreed as he began preparing his pipe. As am I. If that's all, Hokage-sama. Well, I would appreciate full report on the extrication, although I will permit you to leave your source within Kumogaku anonymous, just to make sure there's nothing you might have missed. Of course. His eyebrows raised again expectantly and the Hokage, with an amused smile, dismissed him. He was caught just outside the doors by Jiraiya, appearing to have almost teleported from the nonchalant way he was leaning up against the secretary's desk. That was nice work, kid. The old man might not be able to say it because of all that formality crap, but I know for a fact he's proud of what you did. He pushed off the desk and grinned as he fell into step with the blonde, weaving through the tower towards the exit. I know we preach teamwork as doctrine here, but there aren't a lot of people who would go to those sorts of lengths for a comrade, especially someone they don't know. Like I said, it was opportunistic. I was just in a position to help. Jiraiya hummed thoughtfully. So you say. But, now that I think about it, you know the girl's sister, right? A very different kind of smile grew on the older man's features. Maybe you wanted to be the dashing hero, rescuing her little sister for the reward of a kiss. Little tip from experience, that usually works better when you do the saving yourself. When Naruto gave him an incredulous look, he sniffed and rubbed his nose. Although, I suppose breaking into a highly secured ninja village just coming down from war readiness would have been a bit much for one girl. His grin came back with a vengeance. But damn if it wouldn't make for a great story. He reached into a pocket and withdrew a little notebook, scribbling away at it with gleaming eyes. Like I said, it was a moment of opportunity. Hinata had nothing to do with it. Jiraiya simply snickered as he absently pointed forward with the end of his pencil. You sure about that? Naruto looked up to retort, but Jiraiya had vanished. In his place was a fluttering note hanging in the air. Naruto didn't need to grab it to see it had a picture of a chibi Jiraiya with his thumb against his nose, wiggling his fingers childishly. It did, however, have a time and location on the back, so he pocketed it for later, grumbling about irritating Sannin. When he finally looked up, he realized the joke was twofold, as Hinata was standing right there, hands clasped together nervously. Oh, hi, he greeted, a little off balance from her sudden appearance. He could almost hear Jiraiya laughing at his expense. She didn't reply, simply rushing forward and wrapping him in a crushing hug, with more intensity than he thought her capable of. Thank you, thank you, thank you, she kept repeating, over and over, until it became unintelligible, mumbling into his shoulder. When she finally pulled away, her eyes were red and it was clear she had been crying, but there was a weepy smile struggling valiantly against the tide of her emotions. Thank you so much, Naruto-kun. I have my sister back because of you and I can never even begin to repay that. It's okay, he offered uncertainly, utterly blindsided and unsure of how to proceed. Hinata, thankfully, seemed to catch on to his discomfort. It's all right, I know you didn't do this for me. Her smile grew a little. It's just the way you are. But that doesn't mean I'm any less grateful. She glanced down. I know the last time we spoke was difficult. But I needed you to know how much I appreciate this. Her smile could have lit up a room. She's my sister. She choked back a sudden sob, expression trembling between happiness and disbelief, and she collapsed forward again onto his shoulder, half laughing, half crying. She's my sister, and she's back. Thank you. Naruto wasn't quite the socially maladjusted preteen he once was, but he could still only manage to awkwardly rub circles on Hinata's back, doing his best to return the hug. It took her a minute to collect herself, but surprisingly, she didn't even look red-faced when she finally disentangled herself from him, simply looking up to blink back tears. Honestly, he said, I thought you would still be with her. She nodded, biting her lip as if afraid she might devolve into an emotional fit again. I barely want to leave her side, but she asked for you. He blinked in calculated surprise, sighing internally as he was finally allowed to pull himself back on familiar tracks. Part of the plan was Hanabi requesting to meet him after coming back to the village. He didn't think she would do it quite so soon though. I guess she wants to thank the person who organized her escape, Hinata continued with a teary smile. I don't really blame her. I think most of the Hyuga clan feels the same way. He made sure to put a bit show of looking indecisive and sheepish. After that little outburst from Hinata, it wasn't hard, before shrugging helplessly. Well, how can I turn that down? Naruto still hated hospitals, but they were decidedly more tolerable when he wasn't the patient. Nurses bustled this way and that, likely enjoying the decrease in their workload since the war began to wind down. A few gave him deferential or friendly nods. His work combating poisons and providing antidotes throughout the conflict had not gone unnoticed. He wondered how they would feel if they knew it was just a side effect. He was more interested in the poisons themselves than their applications in saving people. Still, it garnered goodwill, and that was never to be wasted, so he made sure to nod back or give the occasional smile. With Hinata trailing at his side, nervous urgency in her step, he stayed away from some of the more flirtatious expressions he could feign. They were usually more trouble than they were worth anyway. They reached Hanabi's private room just as Hiashi was stepping out. For a split second, Naruto could have sworn he'd seen some genuine emotion on the cold man's face, but it was gone so fast it could have been a trick of the light. He gave a polite nod to his daughter, conveying more with the simple action that he could have with words. I'll leave you then, father, the teen muttered, shuffling off into the attached waiting room. Naruto could tell from her eyes that she desperately wanted to be back at her sister's side, but the deeply ingrained subservience to her father won out. Uzumaki-san, Hiashi greeted with a diplomatic smile. All aesthetics, no warmth. I apologize if I was curt with you in the Hokage's office. You must understand how anxious I was to be with my daughter, to ensure her welfare. I couldn't imagine it any other way, the blonde returned, hoping his own smile didn't appear so manufactured. Quite. This is a joyous time for the Hyuga clan, and as the arbiter of my precious daughter's return, I would be remiss in failing to offer you the Hyuga's deepest gratitude. Naruto caught the man's Byakugan activate for a fraction of a second, barely raising the veins around his eyes. He didn't understand why until the man knelt down, demurely placing his hands atop one another, and bowing forward, forehead just a hair above his hands. It wasn't total prostration, but it was likely the most submissive action the proud man had ever taken in his life. Thank you, Uzumaki-san. Know that from this day, the Hyuga are your staunch allies. Should you have need of it, you must merely ask. He stood, making even the deeply humble action look regal and composed. Naruto was genuinely shocked. He had always had an image of Hiashi as a cold, distant man. And, while he didn't want to doubt a father's love for his children, a part of him had always wondered how genuine his concern really was. Very, apparently. I'm not sure what to say. Quite possibly the most honest thing he had said all day. There's no need for that now, Hiashi assured him easily, the faintest hints of a genuine smile on his lips. Although, when you have the time, I would invite you around to the compound for some tea. Now, as I understand it, my daughter has requested your presence. Hiashi continued to surprise Naruto by allowing a hint of amusement seep into his tone. It's the height of inelegance to keep a young lady waiting. Naruto just nodded mutely, moving towards the door, before pausing. In his surprise, he had nearly forgotten part of his act. How is she? He coughed, correcting the slight misstep. Hiashi's features twisted ever so slightly, as if wanting to frown. As far as the medics can tell me, she appears to be in near perfect health. Although they did find traces of unidentified poisons in her system, the barbarians. Hiashi caught himself before he could say anything undiplomatic. At least Kumo had the good sense not to. Well, many of my deepest concerns have been greatly dissuaded today. But I've already said my thanks. I believe it is now my daughter's turn. He moved to go find his other daughter, leaving Naruto to slip into the room. Hanabi looked up and smiled, but was warned from saying anything by Naruto's look. Her eyes flickered to the top of the door and chakra strings immediately spooled in his palm, leaping up and attaching to the privacy seal invisibly inscribed there. He could have placed his own, but that was far more likely to be noticed. Changing the one he knew would already be present was better. Still noticeable, for anyone who knew to look, but he would change it back when he left and that should mostly cover his tracks. How are you holding up? He asked when he felt secure. Nobody should be listening in now. That would grant them a few minutes before anyone could notice a discrepancy. It's been a bit overwhelming, she admitted, leaning back on her raised bed. It's difficult to lie to my family. She smiled wanly. Hell, just over a year ago I didn't think it was possible to lie to my father. He always had this omniscience to him. The Byakugan is a powerful tool, Naruto agreed. It was one of his chief concerns about this whole endeavor, but Hanabi was well trained in its many uses as well. She just smiled. So are fathers. But other than that, she sighed and gave an airy wave of her hand. Pretty much exactly as you thought it would go. Father won't let the Yamanaka anywhere near my mind, citing clan secrets. They seem to be buying the idea that Kumo let me train and generally treated me quite well as a ploy to ingratiate me against Konoha. Those descriptions you gave me of Kumo Nin who would be involved helped a lot. She bit her lip amusedly. Might be a bit awkward if any of them show up to the negotiations. And Hinata? Naruto asked, moving over to the side of the bed. Hanabi's fingers drummed against her sheets. It's tough. I really hate lying to her. But, at the same time, I've had to lie to her the least. Her smile grew peaceful. She's just so happy to have me back, she doesn't even care about the details. Hasn't asked me a prying question except for how I am. It's mostly just a lot of, well. She waved her hands again, but from the redness of her eyes, Naruto could guess the rest. Want to go over any of the story? He asked, but she waved him off. I'm fine, I remember it all like it really happened. Her lips twitched slightly. I'll have to feign an interest in that K person, won't I? Well, he did smuggle you out of Kumo, so maybe for a bit, Naruto joked with a grin, earning a roll of her eyes. Sure. Does that mean I get to slap you for smuggling me in? If that's the only reason you have to slap me, I must be doing something right. Hanabi hit him on the arm before sighing, leaning back to stare up at the off-white ceiling. A part of me still can't believe it all worked. Tell me about it. She moaned, banging her head back against the firm mattress. You have no idea how much I'm going to be coddled over the next few months. It's going to be a pain to even convince father to let me out of the compound to go to the academy. So, he agreed. Haven't broached it yet, but he will. With the impish smile she wore, he could only agree. The most annoying thing is that I won't be able to continue my puppetry for a while. Naruto shrugged. Give it a few weeks. I've already been invited over to the compound. Once there, maybe you show a bit of interest in the skills of the person who brought you back, I humor you a bit and, lo and behold, you're prodigious at it. Hanabi matched his grin before resetting her features into a good rendition of her father's dignified mask. Of course, I am a Hyuga after all. Well, Naruto said, opting for a mocking bow with a far too ostentatious flick of his wrist. If that be all, milady. She laughed, a light, airy sound that seemed to contain all of her relief and anxiety over this whole misbegotten endeavor. She quietened, laying back with a reserved smile. Admit it, you're still a little worried I'll betray you, aren't you? Naruto pulled back, observing her for a moment before smiling. It was the oddest sensation. No, actually, you put your faith in me, it only seemed right I return the favor. It felt strange to hear himself actually admit it, and it made Hanabi's smile grow. Make sure to come visit soon. I wasn't exaggerating when I said how coddled I'll be. Will do. He grinned cheekily as his chakra thread sought out the privacy seal again. Get better soon, Hyuga-san. He wondered what Hiashi would have thought if he saw his daughter sticking her tongue out like that. Naruto had never actually been to an onsen before, so he was a little annoyed that Jiraiya had apparently chosen it as their meeting point. There was no particular reason, just that when he was young it would have been a bit of a luxury on his orphan's stipend. A welcomed luxury, considering the hot water in his building had a tendency to cut out unexpectedly, but he had bigger concerns back then. When he finally started making money from missions, it just became an afterthought. He paused as he placed his clothes in the proffered basket, catching sight of himself in a mirror. He had to admit, war had been good to him. Despite his less than stellar commitment to any kind of taijutsu training, the constant traveling had given him a runner's body, slim, but still muscular. Likewise, the pallor of his skin seemed less unhealthy now, just pale. There was no helping the shadows under his eyes, but they seemed to have evened out over time, giving his eyes a sort of ringed look. There were also a few stories inscribed across his body. The lightly warped skin running up his forearm, from the fight that earned him his Junin jacket. A few white lines across his shoulder from a near miss with a shrapnel trap. The puckered scar from the wound Sasori had left him to die with. Every mark an experience, something that had made him stronger. Tearing his eyes away, he wrapped the provided towel around his waist and walked out into the balmy steam, looking around for Jiraiya. The man wasn't hard to spot, pressed up against the divider that separated the women's springs from the men's, giggling to himself perversely. Okay, he should have seen that coming from the location. You know, he commented idly, slipping in behind the Sannin. A better man would call out, warning the people on the other side of a lecture. You'd never do that to little ol' me, eh? Jiraiya asked with a disturbing pout, only glancing back at the blonde for a second before returning to his voyeuristic exploits. Naruto gave the fence a lingering look, considering how amusing it would be. Knowing the white-haired pervert, he'd find some way of slipping out of any trouble. What did you want, Jiraiya? That at least finally pulled the man away from his lechery, turning to give the blonde a proper once-over. All right, if you're that insistent on spoiling my fun, come on then. He padded over the slick stones and sank into a nearby spring, sighing contentedly. Naruto hesitated a moment before following him in, pleasantly surprised. It was a little hotter than he preferred his showers, but he could already feel the mineral water leaching out some of the tension in his muscles. It was a little too quick to be natural, and he wondered if chakra was involved somehow. Look, kid, I know we didn't exactly get off to the best start what with the whole QB deal. How y'all getting on with that, by the by? Naruto thought back to his training with Asura and shrugged. I'm dealing with it. Good, good, should really expect as much from Minato's kid. There was that itch, somebody bringing up his family. Still, I know how abrasive I can be, so I thought I'd see if there was any way to smooth things out between us. I don't know if you'd noticed, but I'm considered quite powerful. He shrugged languidly, tapping the side of his head. I know our styles are pretty different, but I'm sure there's something up in this ol' noggin that could help you out. A couple techniques, bit of training maybe. Naruto was about to turn him down again. He had come as far as he had on his own, and the implication he needed help was frankly a little insulting, only to pause, thinking about it. Do you know the Rasengan? Jiraiya blinked in surprise. You know about that. When he caught Naruto's unimpressed look, he grinned sheepishly. Sorry, gotta stop assuming stuff. When I look at you, sometimes all I can see is that little blonde brat I trained up from a flaky little numbnuts into one of the most feared men alive. Most people remember him for the latter, but I knew your pops when he was a little idiot, pining after. He coughed into his hand and gave a salesman's grin. But sure. He cupped his hand slightly and chakra quickly swirled into a pulsing blue orb above his palm. It was smaller than Minato's. I know it. You want to learn. It's basically your birthright anyway. Sure. Putting up with Jiraiya would likely be irritating, but as he stared at that innocent, but deadly technique hovering over the man's palm, he couldn't help but feel it would be worth it. Great. Let's just enjoy our soak for a bit, then I can go out and get the balloons. Naruto blinked. Balloons. Naruto idly flexed his hand as he unlocked his door, wincing as he felt the muscles protest. Learning to use the Rasengan was a unique experience. Painful too. He hadn't stressed the tenketsu in his hand this badly since he first started to learn chakra strings. At least he had an advantage manipulating pure chakra outside of his body. Otherwise, he imagined learning the technique would take months. As it was, he had gotten the first stage down pretty neatly, spinning the water inside of a balloon. He was more than used to manipulating multiple strings of chakra in different directions. The look on Jiraiya's face when he almost instantly got it was priceless. The next step, concentrating the power down into a single point, proved more of an issue. It ran counter to everything he had learned to do with chakra outside of the body. With his strings, he wanted them as fine and unnoticeable as possible, with only the absolute bare minimum for conveying commands to his puppets. That changed of course when controlling Asura, but then, using the Kyuubi's chakra always carried an element of some strange, external instinct he could never quite define. No, focusing his chakra into a single point, condensing it, that would be where he'd have to work at it. Just thinking about how much work it would take before he could use the technique through a puppet was exhausting. Using some clones to speed things along might be in order. Right now though, he was tired, and sick of the sound of air escaping a rubber ball. He just wanted to get through his daily reports and get some rest. He walked up the stairs, only to pause, frowning. It felt like he was missing something. The feeling persisted all the way into his workshop, where he caught sight of Hanabi's empty bed, covers still thrown back messily. Around this time, he should have come back to the sounds of her practicing her kata. It was suddenly too quiet. He tried to shake it off, but that nagging feeling that something was off just wouldn't go away. Kami, how pathetic was that? He had grown so used to his little captive being around that he actually missed her. He chuckled to himself quietly as he sank back into his desk chair, only to freeze. That wasn't it. Something was off. This wasn't where he had left his chair. He stood, eyes darting about, noting all of the infinitesimal discrepancies around his workshop. A puppet, hanging at a slight angle compared to the rest on the rack. The files on his desk too neatly arranged. Most people would have thought Naruto's study a bit chaotic, with all the various clones mostly doing their own thing. But Naruto knew exactly how he liked his workspace arranged, and this wasn't it. Although somebody had done the best to make it look that way. His frown deepened as 3 clones popped into existence around him, immediately searching for anything else that might be out of place or missing. It didn't take them long, each knew the workshop just as well as the original. Sasori's ring, embedded with a strange purple stone and inscribed with the kanji for the Black King in shogi. Naruto had been messing about with it since the fight, trying to figure out its significance. He knew it was charged with chakra, but he couldn't work out for what reason, or what the inscription signified. He figured that it was some boast of the deceased puppeteer, that he was a manipulator and always the one to make the first move. He thought it decidedly less likely that it referred to one of the 9 mantras in Kuji-in meditation. Whatever if meant, it was gone, but strangely, nothing else appeared to be. Who would break into his apartment, past all of his defenses, which hadn't gone off once, only to steal a simple ring? The answer seemed pretty obvious, if disturbing. Another clone found the entry point, a patch on the floor near an external wall that bore trace amounts of chakra, as if somebody had used some variation of the subterranean voyage technique. However, that still should have triggered his detection seals. As soon as an unknown chakra signature stepped foot inside his walls, he should have known about it. That implied the person had never fully entered the building, which was strange in and of itself. It also wasn't possible via any earth technique he knew of. He quickly gathered up his equipment before hopping out the window, trailing the faint chakra signature. He left his clones behind to tidy up and make sure there weren't any nasty surprises left behind by his guest. He didn't get very far, losing the trail not far from his building as it vanished into the ground. Still, he wasn't deterred that easily and took off in that general direction, racing through the village. As he suspected, he caught the trail again at the village's sturdy outer wall, where the intruder had managed to disrupt the delicate ceiling matrix covering the reinforced stone. Not enough, apparently, to set off the wards, but enough to be noticed when he knew what to look for. Direction confirmed, he hopped the wall and landed in a dead sprint. Nobody stole from Uzumaki Naruto. He was so incensed by the heinous breach in his security, that he was almost 3 miles out before realizing how far from the village he had been drawn. He slowed to a stop and glanced around warily, lips drawn down in a frown. Shit, I walked right into that one, didn't I? His answer was the flutter of 1,000 tiny wings. All around him, erupting from the ground, the foliage, the trees, were a countless host of delicate white butterflies. Although, on closer inspection, he realized they weren't butterflies at all, but little origami constructs. They swirled in the air hypnotically, swarming into a concentrated mass that seamlessly merged into a floating woman. She was held aloft by large white wings, also formed from paper. She was rather beautiful too, completing the angelic connotations. Unusual blue hair was cut just above her shoulders, held in place by a paper flower. It would have been quite charming if not for her cold, orange eyes, staring at him with such disdain it would have made even Jiraiya think twice. He personally thought the little silver piercing through her lip was a nice touch, only marred by the familiar red clouds adorning her cloak. That was rather beautiful, he admitted, trying for something of a rakish grin. He always had a little trouble figuring out how he was supposed to act around kunoichi, especially ones trying to kill him. He sometimes had success distracting them with some form of charm, but other times it only served to incense them further. I've always had an appreciation for people manipulating swarms of weaponry, like 1,000 tiny puppets. The woman remained silent, sizing him up as she floated there stoically. He didn't let it show, but her absolute silence was a lot more unnerving than any number of brash boasts or snide put-downs. You must be Conan, I presume, one of the leaders of a megacorps. It had been a nightmare to learn even her name. I bet there's one hell of a story behind that. His grin faded when he saw it wasn't having much of an effect. You aren't the one who broke into my building. That either meant she was covering for them until they got away, or they were lingering nearby as a double ambush. No, she admitted, her voice soft but no less imposing for it. What happened to Bright Eyes and the sashimi platter? I thought they were my designated kidnappers. Admittedly, it was more of a presumption, considering a small group like the Akatsuki had only so many resources to collect the scattered and well-guarded Jinchuriki. Well, supposed to be well-guarded, he thought, considering his genius move of blundering right into this trap. Their skills were deemed ill-suited to capturing you, she replied. She would have had quite a pleasant voice, if she wasn't trying to kidnap him for undisclosed nefarious purposes. He glanced up, admiring her wings. He wasn't lying about that, he really did find her techniques beautiful. He had never seen anything quite like it. And you are. I was the one who recruited Sasori into our organization. I have prior experience in dealing with recalcitrant puppeteers. The blonde grinned, examining his surroundings carefully without drawing attention to it. If I didn't know any better, I might have thought that was a joke. But, I can assure you right now, the grin abruptly slipped away as he drew out a scroll from a concealed pocket. I am nothing like Sasori. He whipped the scroll up, unraveling it in the air in a smooth motion before bringing his hand up to slam the chakra in to release his puppet, only to fumble it, punching the scroll forward without releasing anything. Both shinobi watched as it bounced across the ground, rolling to a stop between them. Well, Naruto said, blinking, that's embarrassing. He chuckled sheepishly, rubbing the back of his head. I'm still new to the whole flying puppet thing, I may not have quite nailed that maneuver. Conan looked like she wasn't sure whether to be amused or bored, and Naruto chose that moment for Ramia to burst out of the ground behind her. The snake-based puppet shot through the air like an uncoiled spring, slamming right into Conan's back and wrapping her powerful tail around the angelic woman's body. 100 little compartments opened up along the puppet's form, releasing little poison spikes designed to deliver a potent paralytic all across the victim's body. Ramia's head also moved forward, razor-sharp fangs plunging down into Conan's neck. That was the lethal poison. Except, even in the split second all of that had taken, Conan didn't once look surprised. The fangs bit into nothing but paper. The woman's entire body split apart, previously invisible seams drawing her body into neat little squares that fluttered off into 1,000 sheets of paper. Most of them swept outwards, expanding into a crisp white storm around the puppet. A few stuck to Ramia, their undersides revealed to be custom exploding tags. There wouldn't have been enough time to move Ramia to safety, so, out of curiosity, he forced her to explode prematurely. He had gotten this down to a science by now, and the various weapons and shrapnel she blasted outward was practically undodgeable, being so uniformly spread. Each superheated kunai or shard of wood only served to make the paper's sheets spin and dance in their wake, harmlessly passing through the papery cloud. Now that was beautiful. I'd really love to know how you do that, he drawled, unconcerned with the loss of a single puppet. He had more than he could use at once scattered across his person. He refused to be caught alone ever again. A clone of some sort. His eyes narrowed as the swarm of sheets once again merged back into the blue-haired angel. No. Far too complex and resilient for a clone. Some chakra-based body modification I'd wager, like the Shodaime was rumored to be capable of with his Mokuton. He regarded her curiously. Paper comes from trees, you wouldn't happen to be a senju, would you? Orphan, she replied, eyes still lidded dispassionately. He clicked his teeth in mock frustration. So much in common, yet fated to be enemies. Last chance, if you stop trying to kill me, maybe we could sit down and have a civil conversation. Who knows? I teach you a little puppetry, you show me how that wondrous ability of yours works, and we see where it goes from there. One of Conan's thin eyebrows rose imperiously. Her otherwise soft features lent the expression an amused quality, instead of appearing haughty. You really are nothing like Sasori, he would have simply dissected me to learn what he wanted. Naruto's features morphed into a tight smirk as his hand slipped into his jacket again. Don't tempt me. They exploded into action again, this time of the more traditional variety. Naruto's hand snapped out and this time he didn't intentionally fumble a blank scroll. Puffs of smoke filled the air as 5 puppets popped into being, 3 copies of Hein, an Arakun, and another Ramia. He didn't even have to use his Mugen no Kanose, this many he could handle just fine. 5 was a good number for him. He could control each puppet with one string, thanks to their embedded chakra wires, but the extra bit of control gave them a certain finesse. One of the Hein swept forward, feathers glinting in the light streaming through the canopy. The ridges of both wings were wickedly sharp, able to slice right through trees without slowing down too much. Conan waved a hand and a few stray sheets of paper rapidly folded into origami shuriken, the kind kids would wave around at festivals. Naruto suspected these wouldn't be quite so flimsy. It was a pretext though. Hein flapped her wings and abruptly jinked to the side, her wide wingspan a cover for Ramia moving into position. The tail flicked up and sand streamed from her tail, enough of a spread to catch Conan's whole body but still have enough power to do some damage. Conan's wings flapped forward, creating a gale of wind strong enough to stop the sand cannon in its tracks. The moment they reached full extension, Arakun was already there, spitting out a glob of adhesive that caught the tips of the woman's papery wings. She tried to extend them again, but the clear slime was already hardening. Apparently, Conan didn't rely on them for her flight as, even locked together in front of her, she remained hovering. Instead of trying to break the adhesive's grip on her, the wings detached from her back. Everything except the glue-drenched tips dissolved into a multitude of sheets, each folding into shuriken faster than any human hand could have managed. They burst forward like white shrapnel. When the blonde saw a few slice right through a nearby tree without so much as slowing, he knew not to be in their path. His other 2 Hein copies flapped their wings, imitating Conan's move. It was enough to slow the deadly origami display, if not stop it outright. Any that would have hit him was stopped by Arakun, spitting a glob of adhesive down at her own spindly legs. She reared back on the 4 not covered, stretching out the other half before the glue could harden. It formed a sticky, impromptu shield that easily caught the remainder of the shuriken. Well, this is fun, Naruto declared brightly, clapping his hands together as the counter-solution seeped from the tips of Arakun's legs, dissolving the web and leaving the shuriken bundled up like a real spider's prey. Got anything bigger? I'm beginning to form theories about how your ability works, but I could always use more examples. Conan's eyes narrowed, and Naruto immediately regretted the quip. She raised a hand, and paper leapt to her unspoken command, forming a much larger chakram that began to spin, unprompted. It quickly became a circular blur, making a strange keening sound as it hovered in place. It launched forward like it had been held in place by an invisible elastic band, streaking through the air. One of the Hein puppets tried to dive on it from above to knock it out of the air, only for the spinning weapon to abruptly flip 90 degrees. Hein was bisected as her own momentum carried her through the razor-thin chakram. It didn't even slow down. Naruto dived to the side as it carved a clean furrow through the ground he was standing on. It continued on in a neat arc before flying back up to Conan, orbiting her like some strange, flat moon. Another was already forming behind her. Survive now, joke later, he muttered to himself as he sprinted forward, his puppets running interference. The two chakrams shot forward again, spreading out in wide arcs to pincer the blonde between them. One hit a strand of webbing hastily shot between two trees. Still wet, it managed to tangle the blade up and render it useless. A click sounded from Ramia's tail, and the second one was neatly sliced in half by a jet of concentrated water. Naruto grinned up at Conan as he alighted on a branch, only for his shoulders to slump when he spotted 5 more of those giant chakram fold into existence around her. The woman wore a quiet smirk of her own at his dismay. You are correct, you are nothing like Sasori. The scorpion put up much more of a fight. Naruto's eyes narrowed at the slight, surprising Conan as he suddenly leapt of the branch right at her. Her weapons flew forward, but mid-flight one of the Hane copies suddenly streaked down from above. She tucked into a tight ball mid-dive and her feathers erupted outwards like a bird-themed fleckette mine. It wasn't enough to destroy the sturdy paper constructs, but it did divert them from hitting Naruto as he closed the distance between them. I said I wasn't like Sasori, he growled, twisting his body and slamming into Conan with his feet. She tried to use her wings to create distance, but he was sticking to her body with chakra, the control that implied was tremendous. I never said I didn't learn from him. One of his arms came up, the sleeve sliding back to reveal the complex contraption strapped to his wrist. Once upon a time it was a simplistic Senbon launcher. 2 years of tinkering, and some more recent additions, had made it so much more than that. A thin pipe slid out, twisting sharply, and Naruto grinned. Paper's pretty flammable, right? The sudden glare of the flames was almost as intense as the heat, and Naruto was forced to close his eyes. He held the white-hot stream of fire for a good 3 seconds, enough to reduce the fuel stored in the special, seal-inscribed wrap further up his arm by about half. Sasori's secret, it seemed, was twofold: the fast-acting aerosol-igniting agent he used as fuel, and the specialized mechanism that injected in oxygen. Naruto was still tinkering with the ratio, but from this test, he figured he was pretty close to Sasori's flames. He cursed as the distraction of the fire made him lose his control over the chakra, sticking him to Conan's stomach, landing in a crouch in the undergrowth below. He cursed again for his hand, now bearing an ugly red burn on the palm. Fuck, that'll teach me to use an untested prototype in the field. He refrained from waving it about, biting his lip as he wreathed the hand in green medical chakra. He made a mental note to add some more protections before he tried that again. Or a glove, at least. He glanced up, narrowing his eyes at the silhouette still floating in the fading cloud of smoke. Conan barely looked injured, irritated more than anything. Random patches across her body were peeling away in sheafs of paper, a few smoldering pathetically. Not so flammable then. He supposed that was a bit of an obvious weakness. S-rank, he had to remind himself. Don't underestimate the S-rank kunoichi with the essentially unknown abilities. All he seemed to have accomplished was destroying her Akatsuki cloak. Although, he couldn't say he didn't appreciated the view. Conan apparently favored tight-fitting black leggings and a high-collared, sleeveless blue dress, a shade darker than her hair, unzipped at the front from the base to just below her bust. It revealed the 4 matching piercings around her navel, counterparts to the one on her lip. He didn't have long to admire the sight, as he remembered the very deadly weapons he hadn't quite dealt with. He jumped and the first chakram passed below him, but he wasn't really one for the aerobatics. The second nearly took his arm off, and might have if Ramia wasn't suddenly there, smacking it the side without touching the lethally sharp edges. He turned and used the remainder of his flamethrower's fuel to destroy the rest, this time applying a thin layer of chakra to his hand to avoid burns. It seemed her constructs weren't as flame-proof as she was herself. Good to know, although the knowledge came a little late to save him as Conan recovered from the surprising assault. Her eyes narrowed, and the first paper chakram Naruto had narrowly avoided froze midair, reversed its spin and flew right back in a fraction of a second. It was too sudden, and Naruto could only blink in shock as it ripped right through his back, coming out the other side soaked in blood. Oh, he muttered lamely, legs stumbling forward even as his torso fell the other way, cleanly bifurcated at the waist. Conan merely sighed, spreading her hands to form 2 new wings that flapped once, forcing the 2 halves of Naruto's body to flip over. Your substitutions are just as impressive as Itachi said. I might have believed the ruse, if not for his warning. A sigh seemed to echo from tree to tree, source indeterminable. Naruto burst into smoke, revealing Dami's severed halves in his place. Well, that kind of takes the fun out of it, doesn't it? Naruto called out, throwing his voice with chakra so it appeared to come from several places at once. How'd you know? You never visibly replaced the puppet you lost, she responded coolly, slowly rotating in the air. Once you made it known you could control 5 separate puppets, not filling that hole in your defense meant either an ambush, or a substitution target. He clicked his teeth, the noise sounding distorted as it bounced around the trees. That's frighteningly perceptive, actually. I'll have to work on that when I get away from here. You believe you still have a chance of winning? Conan asked, eyebrow once again quirking in muted amusement. Better than most, I imagine, he called out, still scattering his voice. His puppets had retreated into the shadows, Conan couldn't keep them all within her line of sight, and they slipped away the moment she wasn't looking. Still, she was certain the blonde wouldn't go far. He had to be able to see his puppets to manipulate them with any skill. Still, I would really much rather talk about your abilities. The more I see, the more I'm entranced. He grinned from his hiding place, enjoying the momentary reprieve. Come on, I'm thinking some kind of gradual attunement with your chakra nature. Doesn't feel like a Kekkei Genkai, so I'd say you've slowly been shifting the essence of your chakra by working it into paper, creating a kind of spiritual muscle memory. Am I close? He whistled, sounding like an entire flock of birds at once. How long did that take? Years. Decades. That's the kind of commitment I can really come to appreciate. You remind me of my sensei, she replied, seeking out likely spots that would offer a good view, even if she were to move the arena. He was the type to try to charm women mid-combat too. Naruto's tone darkened slightly as he replied, don't mistake banter for charm. I ask because I've found it's often the easiest way to learn. If I have to pin you down like a butterfly to learn what I need to, I will. Conan's smirk vanished as her eyes narrowed. Konoha has succeeded in raising quite the monster, haven't they? Her wings gave a powerful beat and lifted her further into the air. She spread her arms, palms up, like a true angel offering forgiveness. Fortunately, I've been preparing to deal with a monster much more dangerous than you. From where he was hiding, Naruto blinked as he noticed the tree branch shift and writhe, sections of it splitting open along seams too straight to be natural. All around him, the forest came alive with movement as the very trees themselves seemed to turn themselves inside out. Thousands, no, hundreds of thousands of explosive tags, seamlessly blended with natural environment, attached to every conceivable surface as far as he could see. I apologize, Conan began, floating higher, if my trap seems messy to you. I understand that you puppeteers suffer the meticulous details. Unfortunately, I couldn't quite know when you would realize you were being lured into a trap, so I took the liberty of covering everything within a mile radius. She placed her hands together, making the ram seal appear elegant as she crested the canopy, flying ever higher. Naruto's fingers were already moving with a vengeance, calling Hane over to him to fly him out of this death trap, but he knew it was already too late. In a last-ditched effort he pulled a small scroll from under his jacket and flooded it with chakra, even as the first tags began to catch flame. He could only hope that the improvements he had made were enough. Conan observed her destruction dispassionately. Smoke still billowed copiously from the 2-mile-wide blackened swathe of forest. No ninja save the Yondaime Hokage, and perhaps the Raikage, could have escaped in time. That trap had been the work of nearly 800,000 explosive tags. It wasn't the most she could bring to bear, her maximum was in the millions, but it was more than enough to bring down even a Jinchuriki. Han, the 5 tails container, proved that. She glanced to the side, noticing a few sheets peeling away from her wings. Maximum or not, that was an extremely exhausting move, and she was feeling the dip in her reserves. Jinchuriki were never to be underestimated. She allowed herself to fall on the air currents, more buoyant than usual thanks to the raging fires still carving up the forest below her. Konoha would be alerted, but she had some time before their first responders could reach them. She drifted over the blackened hellscape below her, observing the orange embers lazily drifting off the twisted, blackened charcoal that used to be trees. Nothing green remained in a near-perfect circle. She briefly wondered what her child self would say if she could see the absolute destruction wrought from that first simple act of folding paper. She had once sold her little origami flowers on the side of the road, making barely enough not to starve, and now she could do this. So much had changed. She spotted movement in the billowing clouds of smoke and ash, being carried up by their own heat and spreading out above her in a dark parody of a mushroom. Her eyes narrowed. Whatever it was much too large. Briefly, she worried that the QB had been released. Then it stood. It was a person, only, scaled up 100-fold. Even floating high above the blasted trees, the puppet towered a full head higher than her when standing. Naruto was perched unsteadily on its shoulder. It staggered, rocking the ground with a titanic footstep as its puppeteer breached the smothering layer of smoke, coughing. His jacket was blackened and smoldering, the entire right sleeve burned off to reveal the mechanism strapped to his arm. Light burns covered nearly every inch of exposed skin, but already those were beginning to peel, replaced by new, unblemished skin. He coughed again, spitting up ashen black phlegm through watering eyes. Shit, he croaked, throat raw and parched. That raises all sorts of interesting questions about your abilities, doesn't it? That's impossible, Conan said quietly, eyes narrowing. Naruto gave a crazed grin, spreading his arms wide. For a moment, he reminded the faux angel of Deodara. Impossible's just a word, and I'm the living antonym. He wobbled, nearly slipping from his perch atop Asura's shoulder. Even her titanic body wasn't enough to completely protect him from such a blast. She was mostly undamaged, the explosions only really managing to blacken her thick shell. It gave her an even more intimidating countenance. He coughed again, feeling as though he had swallowed a barbecue. Kami, what an awful line. That blast must have rattled my head. Conan wasted no more time with words, she was now on a clock of her own making, with Konoha shinobi likely to arrive within minutes. Her wings flicked forward, releasing dozens of razor-sharp sheets of paper. They folded themselves in midair, sleek little paper aeroplanes that flew forward faster than kunai. She had seen her Kami Shiga decimate solid concrete. Asura merely lifted a hand, and the lethal barrage harmlessly thudded into her thick palm. The enormous puppet shook the appendage like she had received a bee sting, and the paper constructs fell off like bits of annoying gravel. Inside, Conan felt the first stirrings of fear. It was uncanny, how much this titanic construct reminded her of the monster Nagato summoned on that dreadful day. The lower pair of hands slammed together, making a recognizable hand seal, before pulling apart and slipping together again, fingers changing places as deftly as her controllers. I didn't think I'd get the chance to try this out again so soon, Naruto called, looking a little unbalanced from the smoke inhalation. So, thanks for that. Conan's eyes widened, pulling herself out of her stupor as the hands slotted together into the snake seal. Her wings pushed forward powerfully, forcing her back, but there was no chance she could escape the technique completely. Futon, Renkuden, Naruto shouted, feeling the responding hum of power deep within Asura. It had taken quite a bit of experimentation to learn which techniques felt most natural to use through his puppets, and the results were spectacular. Wind release jutsu were normally invisible, a slight distortion in the air at most, it was what made them so deadly. Thanks to the smoke still rising from the scorched earth, he had a perfect view of the enormous air bullet as it cascaded through the sky. It twisted the smoke into a hazy black maelstrom, following behind like a vapor trail. The technique never hit Conan, it was too slow for that, but that wasn't the point. Jutsu on that scale caused destruction just by existing. The surrounding air was ripped into a frenzy by the passing of the technique, and it was a constant struggle for the kunoiki just to stay airborne against the contrasting currents trying to rip her out of the sky. She would have managed it, had she not forgotten about Asura's second pair of arms. The two hands slammed together like Kami's cymbals, creating a shockwave that almost rivaled the technique itself. Conan was trapped between them, dazed but not defeated. Her Shikigami no Mai protected her from that much. It did little for her though when Asura proceeded to cup her hands in an impromptu prison, raising them so fast the woman was forced flush against the tough, blackened wood. There was a moment of weightlessness as the balled hands reached the zenith of their arc, before they slammed back down with a vengeance. Naruto watched it all from his vantage, wary for even a single sheet of paper escaping from between Asura's clenched fingers. He saw nothing, even when the hammer blow slammed into the ground like a meteor. Had Conan been underneath that, it might very well have killed her. Actually, Being inside that might have killed her. The sheer force of the blow would have been devastating, but the sudden deceleration could be just as lethal. He didn't really want her dead though. He wasn't lying when he declared his interest in her techniques. Asura stood sentinel as he dropped back into the smoky haze of the forest floor, landing at the edge of the strangely ridged crater Conan's unconscious body lay in. You chose a really, he paused to cough, scowling irritably. QB healing couldn't do squat for smoke inhalation. You chose a really bad time to try this, he muttered, climbing down into the hole. For the first time in a long while, I don't have my cute little conscience telling me when I'm doing something potentially morally reprehensible. He shrugged as he sealed her body in a scroll. Sucks for you. He finished up, also sealing away Asura as he sent a few chakra strings to seek out whatever was left of his other puppets. The Konoha first responders would be on him any moment now, and he would need to get his story straight. He figured it sounded pretty plausible to say he managed to hold off an Akatsuki member long enough for backup to arrive, forcing them to flee. Still, he knew that through it all he would be itching to get back to his home and put Conan under the metaphorical microscope. Or not so metaphorical, it would probably depend on his mood. That will be it for this video. If you want more, comment down below, like, subscribe. And see you guys later.